Welcome back, McFly subscribers. Today we're tying the Gamechanger Fly. This fly is the brainchild of Blane Chocklett, and since its conception, it has gone down as one of the most effective flies for fishing all types of predatory fish species. For me, this is the best bass fly ever created. However, it is a bit challenging and time-consuming to tie. In fact, these take me about 45 minutes to complete, and this video will represent that time. However, at the end of the video, you will be able to tie these yourself and not have to spend $20 or more to buy them at the fly shop. Okay, sorry for such a long intro to this fly, as I usually try to keep these short, and we will get to tying very soon. But in case you haven't seen this channel before, this is McFly Angler.
And it starts now.
Okay, let's start tying. Today, we're not starting with a hook like usual, but these articulated spines. And I'm using these ones from Spawn Fly Fish, but other brands do make them as well. We will need 3 different sizes. 9mm, 10mm, and 15mm shanks will comprise this fly. So we need 1 9mm shank, 2 10mm shanks, and 2 15mm shanks. Let's start with the 9mm shank and place it securely in your vise. Now you want to make sure this is in very tightly, and I will demonstrate what happens when it's too loose later in this video. Okay, we also need some thread, and I really like using this vise 140 power thread as it is super strong, and I usually just use white. Start your thread over the open part of the shank, and when you tie over it, the shank will close. Also, be careful at the cut portion of the shank there, as it is sharp and can cut your thread. So I wind over it lightly to cover it before bringing my thread back as far as I can get it on the shank. Trim off the waist when you reach the back portion. Now this shank will be the tail of the fly, so we need some type of material to make the tail. I like using this Chickabou made by Whiting, but other people use whole saddle feathers or synthetic material for the tail. Pull off 2 Chickabou feathers that are similar in size, place them back to back so they splay outward from each other, stroke up the fibers, and roughly align the tips. Now I like a tail that is about 2 to 3 times the length of the spine, so tie this onto the spine with some tight wraps. Then clip off and clean up the waist. End with your thread towards the back of the marabou. For the body material, I'm using Chocklett's own Gamechanger chenille. Some people like making their own dubbing brushes for these also, or tie them with soft hackle feathers. This chenille though works well and takes markers well, and I almost always use a clear color. Pull out about a foot or so of the chenille and clip it off the bunch. Then to get a clean tie-in, let's ship off about 1/4 inch of the fiber from the end of the chenille core. Tie this core in with some tight wraps, then end with your thread up by the shank eye. Now we will start wrapping this up the shank with touching wraps. Make sure you stroke back the fibers with each wrap so it stays clean. On this first shank, you will be lucky to get 3 turns. When you reach the eye, then capture the chenille. You can do this without trapping too much material by wiggling your thread through the fiber. Here I demonstrated though why it's important to make sure your vise is extremely tight. It's easy to knock these off, and we will be making some very tight wraps. Okay, then pull everything back and wrap back up onto the chenille with a couple tight wraps. Trim the chenille off close and then clean up the tag end with some wraps. Now you can whip finish the shank and trim off the waist. Okay, I really got to tighten this more. To cement the whip finish, I really like this Solarez Ultra Thin Resin. It has a handy paintbrush in the cap for easy application. Simply paint this onto the whip finish and cure it with your UV light, which cures it instantly, without needing to wait for it to dry. And will make it so the whip finish never comes loose. And here I am tightening the vise even more. Next we will need the 10mm shanks. Place this in your vise with the open portion up. Then pull down on the eye to open the shank and put the tail section on. Start your thread on the single shank, right behind the shank eye, and then use your tag end to jump over the other wire to close it off. Keep using the tag end to wrap up deep into the back portion of the shank, which the angle can make the thread want to jump back. The tag end does help though. Once you're back as far as you can go, then clip off the tag end. Strip off a little bit of the chenille to expose the core, and tie it in very tightly. Bring your thread back up to the shank eye, and start wrapping the chenille up the hook shank with touching wraps. Also ensuring to stroke the fibers back with each wrap. Here you want to try to get 4 wraps with the chenille. And it also helps to hold the shank eye and pull tight on the chenille. This will tighten it up against the shank and pull it snug against the previous wrap. Okay, when you reach the eye, capture the chenille and wiggle your thread to keep it from trapping fibers. Pull everything rearward and wrap back up on top of it, then trim off the waste, clean up the tag, whip finish, and cement with the UV resin. Okay, let's put on another 10mm shank, add the tail portion, and start doing the same thing as the previous 10mm shank. The only difference here is try to get your thread back as far as possible on the shank, as we really want to try to fit 5 wraps on this shank. Once you reach the eye, capture, trim, whip finish, and cement again. Now we need a 15mm shank. As before, we add the tail portion we have been building up and do exactly the same thing as the 10mm shanks, only this time we're wrapping quite a few more wraps of the chenille. Okay, this was a little tight, but I was able to get 10 wraps on there. Let's capture, trim, whip finish, and cement again. Now for another 15mm shank. Do the same thing, but this time I got 12 wraps of chenille. Capture, trim, whip finish, and cement. Now this gets a little bit repetitive, so that's why I'm fast forwarding and skipping through most portions. Otherwise this would be an hour-long video or more. Okay, we're done now with the articulated body of the fly. And finally we're on to the hook. And today I'm using these 68SS stainless hooks from Risen Fly. They're a rather short shank and a wide gap hook. That is a very strong wire. Great for horsing in those big bass that you're going to be catching with this fly. And today I'm using a size 1. Place a hook securely in your vise. Now we need to add some weight. And for that I'm using lead-free wire in the .020 size. And I find putting it in a bodkin helps with application. Start this wire towards the rear of the hook and make 10 wraps with it. Push the lead together and flatten the ends, and then push the wire deep into the bend below the shank. Now start your thread towards the back of the hook and use the tag end to jump over the wire bump. Clip off the waste once you pass the wire and start making wraps up and down the wire to cover with your thread. Now the reason we're adding weight low like this is because the weight sits lower where the fly is connected to your line. This offsets the weight and forces the fly to swim upright. Otherwise the fly could spin with fast strips. Okay, this is a flat thread, so I'm spinning my bodkin counterclockwise to uncord it. This flattens the thread and makes it cover the wire easier and with smoother wraps. Once the wire is covered, then whip finish the thread. To keep this in place, let's add some super glue. If you have the brush-on super glue, then use that, it's easier. I don't have any right now, as mine dried up, so I'm going to use a bodkin to spread this around the bump here. You might ask, why not use the UV resin? And that's because the resin will cure shiny, and I need this to keep the texture of the thread for future steps. Okay, once that dries, then start your thread again up by the hook eye. Bring your thread down to cover the entire shank with thread, and then come back up to about the 3rd mark on the hook. To attach the articulated body, we will need some wire. And I really like this Senyos intruder wire. Make sure though you use the size 6 or larger. They have one that says 6 or smaller, but you want the heavier wire here. Pull off a few inches of wire and clip it off with some wire cutters. Tie this in on top of the hook, trying to get it in the center, and so the tip extends just to the hook eye. Then start to tie down to the bend of the hook with tight wraps. And you want to go slightly down into the bend, then check it and make sure the loop will be right in line with the hook shank. Now we will place the articulated body onto the wire. Then bring your thread back up to the initial tie-in point. Double over the body and tie it in so that there's a small loop on the back. Try to make sure this portion is butted up against the other wire so that they lay flat. You can also shorten or lengthen the wire at this point, and you want that loop to be very small, just enough for the eye of the tail shank to move, but not too large or it will foul on the hook. Then tie down the wire back until you're happy with the loop size, and make sure the loop stays perpendicular on the hook and doesn't twist. Tie back up to just shy of the initial tie-in spot and then pull the wire back and tie down. This will ensure that the wire does not pull out with hard strikes. Loop the tag end back as well and tie that down. Then cut off the waste piece of wire and save that, as you can tie a couple other flies with it. Now, let's make sure the sharp cut off pieces of wire are covered with thread, so they don't cut the chenille or thread in future steps. Also, let's try to smooth out the shank as best as we can with thread wraps, before whip finishing with a 2 to 3 turn whip finish. Let's add a bit more super glue. Again, brush on would be best, but make sure the super glue goes back to the loop but doesn't actually get in the loop, just over the thread right up against the loop. This will harden the thread and keep everything in place. Now we need to let this dry before moving on to the final steps of tying. When it's dry, start your thread again and bring it back to just in front of the wire loop. Now, expose the chenille core once again and tie that in. Then bring your thread up to the hook eye. Now we will start wrapping the chenille up the hook shank in the same way we did with our articulated shanks, stroking the fibers back with every wrap. I was able to get 15 wraps here. Capture the chenille, pull back the fibers, wrap back up over them, then cut off the waste chenille, clean up the head, and whip finish. But we do not need to cement the heads yet. Now we're going to trim the flies to a rough baitfish shape. I like using these longer scissors versus the standard 4-inch that I've been using. The 4-inch will work, but these 5-inch do make it a little bit easier. The fly can twist while cutting, so it's important to make sure that the spines stay even. If you look, the back portion of each spine is up and down, and the front eyes are side to side. We will lay this down on the side of our desk so we can cut from the tail to the head. This ensures that we get deeper cuts initially, as you're cutting against the direction of the fibers. And this is positioned so the hook point is out sideways, and we're cutting the side part of the fly first. Make a tapered cut so the back is shorter, and the front head is kinda not cut at all. This is a rough cut, so we will be trimming multiple times to form the shape. Right now, we're just knocking down some excess fiber. Then turn over the fly and cut the other side the same way. Okay, you can see here that the fly has now been narrowed a bit. Let's do the top now. Make sure the tail is out of the way and start cutting in a similar taper as the sides. Okay, that's starting to look a little bit more tapered. A very rough shape, but still looking better. Now let's cut from the front to the back, which doesn't make as deep of cuts. So we need to make more cuts to remove the same amount of material. This allows us to slowly bring this to shape, ensuring that we don't cut too much off at once. I like to make the sides more narrow than the top and bottom, as most fish are shaped that way. So keep cutting the sides until you're happy with the rough shape. And again, we don't need to get this perfect just yet. I can't stress this enough, we're only getting a rough shape here. Okay, let's round out the heads a bit and knock the corners off. We need to pinch the head and stroke the fibers out a bit. Then we can make a rounded cut so it's angled from the hook eye to the hook point. Then do the same thing for the top. Try to get a similar angle and curve as you did for the bottom. I like to look at the fly from the front to even out the head and create an oval shape, so the top and bottom are taller than the sides are thin. Continue knocking down some fibers that are sticking out further than the other side, or ones that look off and not a smooth taper. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Now we need to run this underwater to wash out any trim fiber dust. This will help when we use the markers to color this up. After running it underwater, I like to flatten it out and pull the fibers out a bit, then sandwich this between 2 paper towels and press out any excess water. Now we need to let this dry before coloring up the fly. So here I usually start coloring up the fly, but when filming, I lost track of steps and started putting on the eyes. I am using these fish skull living eyes in the earth color, and I find the 7mm is best for this size fly. We need to make a flat spot for the eyes to rest on. So let's cut out a small area up by the head here. I finally realized after cutting this that I do need to color the fly first before adding eyes. So for that, I'm using these add markers. They are solvent-based, so they're waterproof. And they have a large chisel tip, so they transfer color very easily. You could also use colored Sharpies as well, but they are a little slower. The colors I'm using today are lemon yellow and cadmium orange for the belly, aquamarine for the blue gill area, and olive for the back. We will also need to make a black dot on the side. A Sharpie works great, but so does the black ad marker. So let's start with the belly. Color up the belly with a yellow marker, and I find it helps to brush both forwards and backwards to get the color at the roots of the fiber and not just the top. Okay, now let's add a few touches of this orange, and then use our fingers to smear that around and blend it in with the yellow. Now use the blue to create a blue gill on the fly, just a thin strip on both sides. Now for the olive back. You want to make sure that the top portion is colored, and leave a white belly down by the body portion of the fly. Okay, that looks good. Now let's add the eyes. For that I like this gel type super glue, as it gives me a little bit more time to adjust the eyes before it sets. Grab 2 eyes, and then add a small dot of glue on that portion you cut down earlier. Place the eye on, and keep it as flat as possible. Also pull it back from the hook eye, so it's just touching the back of the whip finish. Now for the other side. This eye is a little bit more difficult because you have to make sure it's in line with the other eye. You will also want to look at this from the front as well to ensure that the eyes are both perpendicular to each other and they're not canted to one side or the other, and then adjust accordingly. The more even the front, the better this fly will track when stripped. Okay, let's let the glue dry a few minutes before moving on to the next step. We will want to now close the gap between the eyes with some UV resin. However, there is some fiber in the way, so let's remove some of this. Start cutting between the eyes, removing some of the fiber, and we will clear out some of the fiber on the bottom as well. Now let's turn the fly so the nose is angled up slightly, and for resin, I have this medium viscosity resin by Solarez. It's the perfect stuff for this application. Let's squeeze a little in between the eyes, filling up the cavity. Then use a bodkin to ensure it fills up the nooks and crannies. Now cure the resin with your UV light. This made a flat spot across, and I want this bumped out slightly to give a rounded look. So I'm going to add one more dot and ensure that it's spread around evenly with my bodkin. And then cure that. Now turn the fly so it's angled down and flip the fly around. We will now fill up the bottom portion in the same way. This ensures that the eyes do not compress when fish strike, which could cause them to break loose. Super glue alone is not enough to keep the eyes on, but filling up the gap with resin will go a long way in the durability of this fly. Okay, after the bottom looks good, let's coat the eyes and head in ultra thin resin. This is super thin stuff, so it's perfect for making a thin layer of resin around the eyes. However, we need more than just one brush full of it, so dunk the brush back in the resin a few times to get this coated well. This layer of resin will ensure that there is no corner for a fish tooth to get under, which could rip off the eyes. Will you still lose eyes with this method? Yes, but far less frequently than the super glue only method. And I usually catch quite a few bass with one of these before the eyes come loose. But you can always reattach and resin up again if that ever happens. Okay, the fly is now fishable like this. However, I like doing one more trim to really clean this up and make it swim better. Let's trim the top and bottom first, giving it clean lines. Now I do have this little bump here, so I'm going to try to trim that without cutting too deep. All these final cuts should be small, trimming only tiny bits of fiber with each cut. You can always trim more, but you cannot put back the fiber if you over trim this, so be careful. Okay, let's clean up the sides slightly. Again, be careful and don't overcut. Also, if you cut away some of the fiber that is hanging over the next joint, this will swim with more movement. That fiber can impede the movement and reduce the turning radius of each spine. But don't overdo this, as too much movement can be a bad thing as well. Now, it might take you a few of these flies to get the trimming down right, but once you do a few and try fishing with them, you will learn exactly how much this needs to be trimmed. Okay, I'm happy with that. Let's add the black dot on the side now. Okay, the fly is now finished. What a great looking fly, don't you think? Now, it's hard to explain with words just how effective this fly is. That tail moves so well, and every strip causes the back to undulate, just like a fish tail swimming through the water. Even steady strips will cause that tail to move, but you can jerk strip this as well for a more spastic motion. These basically are the large bass swim baits of the fly world, flies that get big bass interested. Here's some footage from a fly tester I did a long time ago. My fly tester sprung a leak, so I can't use it now, but you can see here with the shad color one just how amazing these things swim. They have such a great lifelike look and swimming action. Even the most shy bass will decide to take a bite. I've had bass not even give a look at other flies, and then I throw one of these on, and instantly they come up and inspect. They'll watch the fly for a minute and decide to take a taste, because they just cannot tell that this is not a real fish. You can also color these in just about any color you want. Here's a sexy shad color scheme, and here's a rainbow trout color. This is why I tie these all white, because I can come back and color them in whatever color I want them to be. Okay, well I finished the bass series for this month and fully filled up my fly box. And this box covers just about any bass fishing scenario. I started off the series tying the Clouser minnow, a quick and simple yet effective jigging streamer that works great for covering lots of water with long steady strips, or you could do short sporadic strips, or even jig it near bass holes. The following week I tied up my favorite crayfish pattern for fishing bass, one that I developed. This works great for tossing into holes, enticing bass that are held up in cover, or bouncing along the bottom for bass that are in shallow areas or even deep holes. Last week I tied up this bass popper for you all, which if you've ever fished topwater for bass, you know that fishing poppers for bass is just about the most fun you will ever have out on the water. Bass take topwater flies with explosive takes and dramatic acrobatics. And this week I finished up the bass series with the Gamechanger, a fly that no bass, or really any other predatory game fish, will turn down. I've caught bass, trout, panfish, catfish, and even saltwater fish like redfish and specks with it. Next month, I plan on starting a saltwater series for flies I fish the Gulf with. These flies will be mainly for redfish, since that's my target species when I'm fishing in the Gulf. However, I am going to take next week off, my first break this year, but I will start back up the following week with this redfish crack fly, a fly I never go without when heading down to the Gulf to fish for redfish. So make sure you're subscribed and click the bell notifications so you don't miss any future videos like this redfish crack. Oh, and by the way, I will be selling these fly boxes on Amazon soon with free shipping. They are made entirely of foam, which means they float in case you drop them in the water, and they're also not too thick, so they don't take up too much room in your pack. Yet they can hold some decent sized streamers without compressing the materials, and on both sides as well. Even these Gamechangers will fit in the box, and the box closes. The clasp is magnetic and the magnets are very strong, and I've had these automatically close almost every time I've ever dropped them, which means you're less likely to lose flies due to clumsiness. Now, they're not available yet for sale, as it takes a while to get them put up on Amazon, but I will link to my Amazon storefront so you can check out my other fly boxes. I have some magnetic back ones that are great for dry flies and small nymphs, and some silicone back ones that I use for medium to larger size nymphs. And keep checking back because these foam boxes will be available soon. Also, don't forget to check out my sponsor, Risen Fly. They made the hooks I use today, but they also make some of the best fly rods and reels for the money I have ever used. Best off, they're offering you all a discount. So if you're in the market for a new rod or a bunch of hooks or beads, go to www.risenfly.com and type in McFly at checkout and they'll give you 15% off of your first order with them. Okay, well thanks for watching. If you like this video, do me a favor and click the like button. Also, if you could share all my videos with your fishing friends, I would be much appreciative. I will see you on the next video. Now you go catch some fish.